I have a translator here, I have a mic here, that's the equipment I have, and my computer is somewhere there. Okay. But before starting, I want to ask a very obvious question, but I want to see how what your answer is. How many people here think that education, particularly primary and secondary education, needs change? Okay, so that's kind of obvious, almost nobody says that it doesn't need change. Then of course the debate is of what that change should be. And we can very safely say that change in education can be basically in three things. It can be a change in curriculum, it can be a change in pedagogy or teaching methods, or it can be a change in assessment and examination. So this generally covers the whole of everything that you do in school. So if you want to make a change, that change has to be in one or the other. Where should we start? If you look at historically when changes have happened, usually I find that the change starts from the curriculum end. People would say this doesn't need to be taught anymore, instead of that let's teach something else and so on. Then a whole lot of activity starts because new textbooks have to be written, new teachers have to be trained, or previous teachers have to be trained in a new subject, and new examinations have to be designed. It's a very expensive process, and it's also a very slow process. So, in the past, we had time. And if, once again, if you look at country by country, the rate of change of curriculum was about let's say about 50 to 100 years ago, curriculum used to be revised every 40 or 50 years because the body of knowledge was pretty much static. Then it changed a bit in the mid-20th century, 1950s. And it started to get reviewed about once every 4 or 5 years. And in most countries it continues to be that way. Some countries which spend more money may review it every 2 years. But there is a problem. There are a few subjects today, quite a few subjects, where doing a 2-year review doesn't make any sense anymore. So you end up teaching a lot of obsolete stuff by the time the curriculum changes. And as a school principal or as a school head, you don't actually have much of an option except to wait for the government to tell you to change the curriculum. So you have to go on teaching the old stuff. Is there any other way that we could handle this? So I'm going to try and bring that topic up a little bit later. But right now, let me tell you how I arrived at what I'm going to say. Okay, that's better. Anytime you want to say anything in Spanish, first tell me to put that on. All right. I must also tell you beforehand that my background is not in education. So as you listen, it's possible that in your mind this thought will come, but this is not right what he's saying, because this is something else. Because remember, I don't have a formal background in education. I bumped into education accidentally, and that's a story in itself, how I bumped into education. What was my background? My background was theoretical physics. That is what I studied in school and college because I was interested in physics. It had to do with solid state physics, the stuff inside all of these gadgets. And what happened was, in the 70s, if you were a theoretical physicist, then, or a mathematician, those were the only two people who knew how to write computer programs. Nobody else knew. So when we finished our PhDs and we were all, young people, we said, well, what kind of job shall I get? And we all decided, look, there's no money in physics. But if you become a computer programmer, there's a lot of money there. So a whole generation of physicists in those days, we all turned to computers. There was, imagine there really wasn't even a subject called computer science. It was computers and computer programming. So we all became programmers. I was one of them. I was a programmer in India, and my boss said, it's ridiculous. You've got a PhD. Why are you doing this job? What you should do at least is that you should teach other people to write programs. So after all those years of physics, I finally stood in front of a class having to teach how to write programs. And I had no clue. And I had no background in education. I didn't know what I'm supposed to do. So I kind of tried to teach myself how to teach. So this was going on. I was teaching systems development, computer programming, and so on in New Delhi. As it happened, those were the years, and there may be just a few people who remember it. Those were the years, 1978, 79, when the personal computer was beginning to appear in the market. And the personal computer was 3 months, 4 months salary to buy. So only rich people had them. I had a few rich friends, and they had personal computers at home. I didn't. And all of them began to say that, my little boy or my little girl at home, I think she's gifted. So I said, why? What happened? He said, the other day I was stuck with something on my computer, and my 8-year-old daughter came and said, no, you have to press that and you have to do this. And so, do you think she is gifted? So I had no answer, but I thought to myself that it's very strange that only rich people's children have suddenly become gifted. So what could that be? And obviously the answer was quite easy. The poor people didn't have computers. So I got very curious about the fact that what would happen if a poor child had access to a computer? And I raised a little bit of personal money, and my boss gave me some more money to carry out just one experiment. The experiment would eventually get called Hole in the Wall. I'm telling you this story because it's a bit of a moving story for me. I was just doing this out of curiosity. I had no other intention of anything. It was going to be a 1-week experiment. What was the experiment? Take a computer, put it inside a wall in a slum, keep it 3 feet off the ground, and just see what happens. I had no idea that one day this experiment would change primary education throughout the world. Not a clue. Did it? Well, not really this experiment. It was just an indicator of where the environment was going. So what happened in this experiment? The 3 feet high computer got surrounded by children from the slum. I was there. The children stood around and did nothing. As you can see them scratching their head. Remember, they don't know what a computer is. They don't know what the internet is. I had an internet connection in those days, and this is 1999. So they just stood. So I thought, well, that's very disappointing. They're not going to do anything. But I made a big mistake, which I'll tell you in a moment. While they were standing there, one of them turned to me and said, "What is it?" So now, obviously what I should say is, that's a computer. But I didn't. You know, it was my first lesson in education. I thought to myself, if I said that's a computer, and if I had to do this experiment 1,000,000 times over, I would need 1,000,000 people capable of saying that's a computer. And even till today, believe it or not, those millions are not there. Yes, in your schools, everybody will, but your schools are special. So, with great difficulty, I said, I don't know. And of course, the children laughed. They knew that I knew, but I wasn't going to tell them. Then, after that, I decided that I should watch what they're doing. Now, what happened was that they did nothing. Once again, as teachers, what would you conclude? You would conclude that they haven't understood, or they're scared, or that they're not sufficiently interested. You could have these hypotheses. All of them were wrong. What I learned as my second lesson in education, that the children were not doing anything because I was there. You see, if you have a group of slum children who are underprivileged children, they've got this strange new machine on the wall. There is this man wearing a suit and tie and staring at them. Why would they do anything? So they did nothing. It was like a shock when I realized that I was causing the problem. So I turned around and walked off. And just as I walked off, within about 100 meters away, I began to hear voices from the back. And 8 hours later, my friends came and said, you know, there's something really strange happening in the slum. Those children are surfing, and they're teaching each other how to surf. So I said, in what language? Well, they said there's only English on the computer. So I said, that's impossible. They don't know English, they can't read English. So what are they doing? Nobody knew. But the only lesson I had was that all this happened because I went away. And because I didn't feel very happy about that. So then, my boss got sufficiently interested and he said, okay, I'll let you do it one more time. I said, why? Because he said there might be a simple explanation. The children were staring at the computer, somebody passed by and showed them. Because this is a computer institute, one of your students might have been passing by and said, here, this is how you do things. I said, yeah, that could be accidental instruction. So I repeated the experiment in a village about 300 or 400 kilometers away from Delhi, in an area where the chances of any passing computer engineer would be zero. So, no possibility. So I repeated the experiment, the same results. I went back after a couple of months, and the children there who, again had no idea what it was, didn't understand the language. After 3 months, they're saying to me, we need a faster processor and a better mouse. I said, where do you get that from? So then they said something, my third lesson in education. They said, this machine works only in English. So we had to learn English in order to use it. As simple as that. So I said, had to learn English from where? They didn't know. I mean, they didn't know they were learning it from the internet. And it wasn't good English, it was just functional English, very poor quality English. But enough for them to do what they wanted to. Enough for them to know what a processor was and what a mouse was and so on. So I came back to Delhi and I published the results. And I said, some things can happen without instruction. And the media took it up. The World Bank came in because they were just beginning a program called No Child Left Behind. And they said, well, if some little things can happen without instruction, let's do those. So they funded me. I repeated the experiment many, many times all across India, Cambodia, Africa. And everywhere we found the same results. What were these results? Well, it will take you by surprise, the results. The results were, and there's all the data published already about it, groups of children left unsupervised with an internet connection will, in a period of 9 months, on a computing literacy scale, go from 0 to that of the average office secretary in the West. So there it was, and back in 2000, there was this uproar about what is the meaning of training in that case. What's happening over there? People ask me, how does it work? And I said, I have no idea. I have no idea because every time I go there, it stops, whatever it is. So, how would I know? I mean, you're all school leaders, you know what I mean. With primary school children, if you're doing something furiously and you go there and say, what are you doing? They'll turn around and say, nothing. So you can't study it. But it was happening, it was measurable. Those sets of experiments between 1999 and 2004 wiped out one whole training industry. And a few people here will remember. There was a time when we had classes where a teacher used to say, this is called a computer, this is called a monitor, this is called a mouse, here is how you click the mouse. All those courses stopped because it became obvious that they're not required. I followed through with a whole series of other experiments because I thought if they can understand computers by themselves, what else could they understand by themselves? How would I find out? Well, what I noticed was that whenever I set up a hole in the wall and I would visit it, the children would show off.